Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Helle, Senior Penetration Tester at TCM Security Solutions. And here today we're going to talk about how I was bored one night and found two CVEs and how we can leverage this to hack the hiring process by pen testing free and open source applications. So who am I? I'm an Army, Iraq, and Afghanistan war veteran. I'm also known online as the mayor. And why? Because I was an elected mayor. I hold 3 individual CVEs, as you can see there, and also have 2 CVEs that I earned with another person. I hold multiple penetration testing and IT certifications, the ECPPT, the EWPT, the PNPT, OSCP, etc. I'm a huge advocate for changing the entry processes into cybersecurity careers, and my first professional job in IT was actually as a penetration tester. I'm the creator of the popular movement Pivot and Persistence course, and I'm a former moonshiner. We're here today because hiring in offensive security, cybersecurity positions is broken, right? You need experience to get the job, but you need a job to get the experience. Bug bounty hunting has become saturated, and as more and more people try to break in, the certificate value diminishes for people as more people obtain the same credentials. It's, basic economics and supply and demand. Candidates struggle to set themselves apart from their peers because of this. And unfortunately, with as many certification companies and organizations as there are, few organizations speak the same language when it comes to quantifiable experience. But in security, one thing does stand out among most cybersecurity realms, and that is CVEs. What is a CVE? A CVE is abbreviated for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. It's maintained by MITRE. The CVE database is a repository of publicly disclosed vulnerabilities. A publicly disclosed CVE through MITRE is a first-time disclosure of a zero-day vulnerability finding. Many professionals in the field will go through their entire careers without finding one. Others may find several over the same amount of time. Some CVE findings affect security on a global scale. We're talking about things like zero logon, SolarWinds, etc. Other findings might affect small applications created and maintained by small brick and mortar companies and are free and open source. My first CVE, for instance, came in my first month as a pen tester on a client web application pen test. Size doesn't really matter when it comes to CVEs either, so it doesn't matter if it's a simple reflected cross-site scripting or, again, something as large as SolarWinds. A CVE is a CVE. And being able to find a zero-day vulnerability that is reported to MITRE shows your initiative, your ability to research, the ability to create proofs of concept, write technically, and manage client communications. Why are we doing this and why are we talking about here today? As the title suggested, this was born from a boring Sunday night that I was having. I spend a lot of time mentoring people struggling to find work in the field and helping them try to break in the same way I did. This means that I struggle as well since the hiring process is really a huge challenge. So, leveraging my boredom and knowledge on a Sunday night, I decided to test my theory that earning a CVE will help people find gainful employment. So, in order to find a CVE, we really need to find potential exploitable targets, and this can be easier said than done. Considering application scale, I didn't want to take on a project that was going to take months of research and scraping Windows applications and etc. to see if I could find one. I just wanted to quickly see how fast I could find a CVE to be able to help other people. So I looked at free and open source projects that were likely to not have much security support, right? Larger, more widely used projects like WordPress are tested constantly. Smaller, less used but maintained projects likely were not. That was kind of my mindset going into this. So this served the dual purpose of not only increasing our chances of finding the zero day, but also the opportunity to help a smaller organization secure their application. So I went to town just thinking of things that I could search for in Google and using a bit of Google foo. I thought of big ticket industries that oftentimes do their own in-house work. And I started targeting those industries specifically. Things such as hospitals, schools, hotels, etc. proved to be successful. So I searched for hotel CMS FOSS, and the search landed multiple results. The next challenge was going through those applications that really were free and open source, and not paywall applications hiding behind marketing walls, wanting your email, wanting to market their product to you, etc. Websites that proved results of value or provided results of value were SourceForge and GitHub. And then the final challenge in which applications to target was I able to install them? So not having systems administrator experience, not really working a help desk before, anything like that, not being a web developer, not being a database administrator. Some of these things were challenging for me. So I finally chose the application Hotel Druid. It was straightforward. It was an easy install, and kudos to the developer for that. So a quick note, downloadable applications are generally safe to test, meaning you likely do not need permission to do so on your own machine. Some applications may have licensing agreements that provide for criminal or civil liabilities if testing is conducted. So ensure you read any of the fine print available. FOSS applications generally will not have those stipulations because they're using open source licensing. And even if you are in the clear, know that not all developers will be excited that somebody tested and exploited their application. So you might have to use a little bit of verbal or email judo when you're talking to these folks, and use your best judgment. So back to our talk now. So the exploitation itself is probably the easiest part of the entire process. Good testing methodology matters here. And using tools also works well. So Burp Suite Pro, OWASP Zap help really well. As the time was of the essence, I used Burp Suite Pro because I have it. You could also use OWASP Zap, which is a free product, which is incredible. However, these tools are really not necessary. It's just going to help you with time management and project management a bit. The vulnerabilities that I found in the short exploitation window I had could have been found with basic inputs. So in less than an hour, I'd already found reflected cross-site scripting and SQL injection vulnerabilities. So SQL injection allowed for full access to the SQLite database, which allowed takeover of the data, right? So here we see the web application itself, which I was hosting on an Ubuntu machine. And you can see at the end, I simply add a semicolon here, which you can use to try to break application logic. And here now you see that I've generated a reflected cross-site scripting payload, which got that payload to jump up. And here we can see arbitrary cross-site scripting parameter injection. And all I did here was a simple, I broke the logic using a double quote and closing bracket, and then the JavaScript payload itself. The SQL injection, once I determined that I had SQL injection, I used SQL Map, which is a very common tool as well, and really just kind of makes some of these things easy. You could do this manually. You can see here the payload itself for the union query. It's union all select, and you can just insert null, 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 and then the parameter values you want until you get the output that you're looking for. And again, because this was SQLite, the payloads are a bit different than something like MySQL, etc. So here you can see in this case, I was running a PHP server. The backend database was SQLite, and you can see the version there. In total, I found nearly 50 reflected cross-site scripting vulnerabilities because all these pages were developed the same way, and multiple input parameters were also vulnerable to SQLite. And the total time of testing was less than 2 hours. So literally from installation of the application and ensuring that it's working until I found the vulnerabilities themselves and decided to wrap things up, 2 hours. I think I did it from like 8 p.m. on a Sunday till 10 p.m. that same Sunday. So the application process itself can be quite daunting when we're applying for a CVE, and it's because there's not a lot of documentation available for this process. The first step in the process is to determine if the developer is a certified numbering authority or a CNA. If the developer is a CNA, the CVE application process must process through the developer themselves. If they're not a CNA, you can go through MITRE, and we will be covering the process of going through MITRE here. The process will be changing in the future. You'll be using a CNA of last resort at some point, which will be a third party that will be processing these for them. But that's not the current process, and you should be good for the next year doing it this way if you choose to do this. After determining that the developer is or is not a CNA, which you can do on MITRE's website, there will be a CVE or a CNA link that you can click on, and then you just go through, I think there's about 200 of them, and you just search to see if the developer is a CNA. And if not, then you're in the clear. Otherwise, again, you have to go through them. And then it's a best practice to contact the developer about the vulnerability. We do this out of respect to the developer, but to also give them an opportunity to remedy the vulnerability before we make it public, right? So if it's a lesser used application, it might not have a whole lot of ramifications, right? If you release it without talking to them. But if you did something and you release the vulnerability in, say, iOS or Windows without going through the CVE process, it could really, really affect infrastructure. So in this case, both of those companies are CNAs. But if we just release things into the wild, then we have a whole nother problem that we look at. So again, we want to be respectful to the developer and give them the chance to fix it. And we want to just be respectful to our peers, right? We're not doing this to damage folks. We're doing this to help our industry. It's not an absolute requirement. It is a best practice. And if your developer is not a CNA, use your best judgment with response time. I usually go 72 hours myself. I think 72 hours is a fair amount of time. If you submit it on a Thursday, maybe go, through midweek the next week. But if it's a maintained application, it should be expected that they're going to contact you back. Again, use your best judgment here. So after you've contacted or attempted to contact a vendor, it's time to apply for the CVE itself. And it's done through cveform.miter.org. The submitter needs a valid email, the number of vulnerabilities to report, that you have verified the vendor is not a registered CNA, and that you have verified the vulnerability isn't already listed. You have to do a bit of research on that part, right? You can go through the CVE database to see if that application's been tested and found to be vulnerable before to the vulnerability that you're reporting. You can use Google, search engines, etc., to do some of that research. You want to spend a decent amount of time here. You really would hate to spend a lot of time submitting your report just to find that it's a duplicate. So when you go to submit a CVE request, you see some things here on the screen. Again, at the top, you want to select a request type. You're reporting a vulnerability. You enter your email address, the number of vulnerabilities you want to report. And again, down here at the bottom, you can see that we're verifying this is not a CNA covered product and that it's not already been assigned a CVE. Next, you simply describe the vulnerability type, the product vendor, product name, version of vulnerable software application, etc. So in this case, this was the SQL injection I submitted on Hotel Druid 3.0.2. As the vendor confirmed or acknowledged, at this time they didn't. It took a while longer to get a response back, but that should be changed after. You can always send an update to MITRE to say, hey, look, they've acknowledged at this point. And it's, again, just a good practice. The attack type here was remote because that's what it was. And then you just insert this information based on your findings. So if you've done bug bounty before, this will look similar to you. The affected components, SQLite database, and I just included the one link or the one page. The attack vector, you just want to specify what it took to do it. And the description of the vulnerability, this will be what is listed in the CVE itself. So you want to make sure that whatever you want the CVE to say is what this says here. The CVE database is public, and a CVE number is only made public if the finding is as well. So if you want to have the finding made public rather than private, and there are a lot of private findings, if you want it to be public, you need to have a public reference made for your findings. So my recommendation is typically in the additional information box down here, you'll see we'll provide GitHub link once the ID is issued. You can just create a new GitHub repo and make it private for now and just name it whatever your finding is. And then once you receive your CVE ID, you can change your repo name to CVE 2021 38351 or whatever you want. And then you'll just email back the person who emails you from MITRE and let them know that link. And here you can see me doing that. So you'll receive an email eventually confirming the finding or a denial email requesting more information. Here, for instance, you see that these are reserved. So in the database, you might find those reserved findings. There won't be any information talking about this here. It'll simply say reserved and that there's a number reserved for this finding. So the CVE IDs are issued, and this is at the time where you would update your GitHub repo or whatever reference you're using, whether it be Medium or a public website that you have, etc. And then you're just going to respond to this email with those reference links. Then after the IDs are issued, here you can see I've changed the names of those GitHub repos. And I made them public in order to reference them. And again, reply to the email with the valid links. MITRE will eventually make those findings public. It might take a little while. These are humans doing this work, and you can imagine how many requests they get from folks, right? Whether it be valid requests or people thinking they have something and it's not, and having to request more information. They are overworked. They do a ton of work. So it could take a couple of days. It could take months. I know folks who have waited months for a finding before they've gotten their approval. So use your best judgment again with replying or following up to see if your finding or if your submission has been forgotten about, if it's still being worked on, etc. And then once it is made public, NIST will also assess those findings and update the resources with a CVSS score. This can take many, many days or weeks, so just be patient with that as well. Quick note, MITRE does not attribute findings to individuals. You will not see your name in the database. The individual is the owner of the reference that's used in the CVE ID itself. So it's your responsibility to attribute yourself to the finding in your reference and to maintain and protect that reference specifically. If you were to delete that reference, if you were to not have it anymore, that's the only thing that's attributing your name specifically to that CVE ID. So this is like gold here. If you want to be able to leverage this, you need to make sure that you maintain the reference. And then speaking of leveraging, after you've received a CVE ID, it's time to leverage that success, right? We post it to our socials, our Twitter, our LinkedIn, etc. We network it. I know people who have had it put in their local newspapers. They've been on local news channels before because they found zero-day vulnerabilities. And there's really a lot of creative ways to do this. So down here, you can see I've posted up on Twitter, and then I posted on my LinkedIn as well for those networking channels I have. You also should update your LinkedIn biography, your resume, and whatever else you use, whether your cover sheets, your title line, etc., whatever it is that you're doing. So here you can see I've updated my awards on LinkedIn, as well as my resume. I include my CVEs underneath my certifications. And here's a couple success stories just from some folks who have, in my local Discord channel or in my Discord server, who obtained CVEs and then got jobs. Right, a lot of people I know since originally posting the article that this presentation is based on have found work because of this. It truly does work. The CVE market, so to speak, is not super saturated. People think about ways of leveraging how to break into the industry. They're thinking bug bounty, they're thinking CTFs, etc. This is something that's oftentimes forgotten about. So since writing that article in August, I have seen probably 7 or 8 people get job offers because of this process. So I really, really recommend if you're looking to break into offensive pen testing or offensive security that you consider this. A few closing thoughts. Entry into security positions can be a huge, harrowing task, right? A lot of people in the industry who are already there sometimes forget what it was like when they were trying to get into. Maybe they didn't have much challenge, right? This is still a newer field, so maybe they just got in by necessity, and hey, we need someone to start doing this, and they never had to go through the fight, so to speak. Their challenge was developing the tools, tasks, and procedures we use today. So please, if you break in, leave the door open for the folks behind you. Make it easier for people to get into this field. There are a lot of technically proficient folks who can't get work. Prop the door open once you're in it. Know that there is no one right pathway to break in as well. So if you're listening to this talk and you're trying to become a pen tester, you want to become a red teamer, etc., there is no one right way. You really are going to have to make the best you and find ways that set you apart from all the other applicants and peers. So if a job requires the OSCP, you have to expect that a lot of people applying are going to have OSCP. So what on your resume, what in your experience is going to set you apart from everyone else? And that's why we gave the CVE presentation today, because truly it does set you apart. Whether you work as a SOC analyst, whether you work as a security architect or a pen tester, people understand what a CVE is. And finally, make yourself seen. This can be hard. I myself am very, very introverted, so being seen, being public is difficult, and it was crazy as a mayor trying to be introverted while being a person of the people, so to speak. But you have to make sure that people are seeing you, whether that's having active Twitter accounts, whether that's streaming educational content on Twitch, whether it's making YouTube videos, whether it's winning, CTFs, etc. Make sure people are seeing you. Here's some socials. I'm at Joe Helle on Twitter. My LinkedIn as well. Please connect and leave a message. Just letting me know that you saw me at this presentation today. The GitHub there, I've got some projects on there as well as some forks. Medium, I'm the CyberSec Padawan, and then my website there. A lot of different notes. It's more or less a resource for folks and a notebook. So thank you all so much for having me here today. I truly appreciate the opportunity to talk. And I hope to see you again soon. Until then, take care.